Hi there, I'm Haruka. I'm always pretty lenient when it comes to anime. I love trash, it's just kind of my brand at this point. But there are anime that I do not like. In fact, I can probably use the word hate for a few of them, so I'm going to give you a rundown of what I believe makes a bad anime. So I'm making separate videos on some of these and then not separate videos on others, so I've got some different categories for these. So first of all is the ones that I'm making videos on, so I'm going to mention a bit less about them than the others because I'm going to have a video about them themselves, so whatever. Hansu X Trash. What happened here was not only terrible animation, but terrible adaptation. I watched this OVA, hated it, and then checked the reviews to find that even the people who read the manga hated it. I read the manga, and Hansu X Trash was actually a really interesting ecchi manga. The OVA is just a wannabe hentai. It takes some of the worst moments from the manga, and it doesn't even stick to what the manga does. Basically, it felt like the studio was trying to use Hansu as an excuse to make a hentai, which I wouldn't put past them since I've now seen Manyu Hikensho. Please remember, just because something's ecchi doesn't mean your only goal is to create something ecchi. If it's got a story, have the story. Prison School. I have such extremely differing thoughts on this manga to the point that I need to reread and rewatch the show again and again in order to fully process my feelings on it. I watched the anime first and rated it a 4. I read the manga a month or so later and rated it an 8. So clearly I am very torn, right? This is much like Hansu where it's about adaptation but not fully. I genuinely just don't like the arc of the first season. Everything gets so much more interesting after that first season. Seriously, the sports day arc is probably one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen, building up all these storylines that began and developed after the first season of the anime ended. It's also something I'm going to come back to later, but despite all appearances, I do try to avoid problematic humor. There was something about the way the anime framed all women in the anime that really bugged me. As the story went on in the manga, characters were allowed to develop and change into real people instead of paragons and demons, and there's also only a certain level of horny comedy that I can take before I get bored or annoyed. Then I also want to mention one that I do want to make a video on, but I just haven't put the plans together to make it yet. Sayonara with Tachi no Kramer. I was so absolutely hyped for this show that I made a video about how much I loved the manga, and then by the time the anime ended, it actually made me think less of the manga. So that's how much the anime ruined everything for me. So with that situation, I want to make a whole video about it. But short version, it was unfaithful to the manga by not only adding random scenes that had nothing to do with the heart of the story, and also adding in some random pieces that I felt undercut some of the main charms of the story. You can't talk about how all of these girls are in it together with how abandoned they are by their schools when you give one team a bus and have them play in a literal stadium. But it also exposed flaws within the original text that I must have misread due to translation errors or something. If they truly had Naoshi Arakawa give approval for the different editions, then maybe I just didn't understand what he was trying to say, and that's on me. So yeah, this needs a much deeper dive, but I do not have plans at the moment. Now for some anime that failed to convert on the concept, otherwise known as just plainly not good enough. Kapeki Danshi Aoyamakun. I think that you can figure out that I grade sports anime, specifically soccer anime, very harshly and give it a whole lot less slack than the other anime I watch. The only thing that I liked about this show was that a woman was coaching the boys team, which I thought was cool. Otherwise, I felt that the show failed at both being a sports show and at being a comedy, finding itself stuck in between two concepts. I'm gonna be honest, it's been a while since I watched Aoyamakun, but it's still bad that I just can't think of any specific moments from the show. It's just so forgettable and disappointing. Scrolling through the other reviews, the only thing that is really jogging my memory is that I just didn't find the jokes that interesting. And maybe it's just a different sense of humor, but I feel like it's supposed to be the same type of comedy as Mai from Nichijou, and I like that, but I didn't like this. Overall, the anime tried to be too many things and failed at doing literally anything. You have to really mess up in order for me to want to say that an anime was a waste of time. Then there's Boku no Kanojo ga Majime Sugiru Shobitch Naken, which is also known as My Girlfriend is a Show Bitch. I don't know what that means. I went into this one hoping for some more ecchi comedy because that's just what I do. What I found was no ecchi, just failed sex jokes. Like, every single line of dialogue is supposed to be a double entendre. Maybe if I actually spoke Japanese, I'd laugh at these jokes, but then again, the frequency of the puns and the show's absolute disinterest in doing anything other than making shit puns was what annoyed me about it. And also, I love the Monogatari series, so I can get behind puns that need to be translated. Like, have you ever seen this joke in a show before where it's some magician that's not getting a reaction out of an audience, so they just keep pulling shit out of their pockets and throw them out in front of the audience hoping something lands, but each sequential trick is worse than the other to the point that everything starts falling apart? That image in itself is funny, right? Imagine being the audience in that situation, being constantly bombarded with shitty jokes at a seemingly frantic pace as the person in front of you is desperately trying to get you to laugh while refusing to switch up their material. That is this show. And now for the unholy trinity of shit anime. I genuinely hate these three. Let's start off with Uchi no Maid ga Uzasugiru. I watched one episode of Uza Maid and dropped it harder than my second semester of college. There's just something so utterly and gutturally enraging about this show that is terrifying at the same time. Before I start, I do have one thing to say as to the reason why I was even watching this show, which is the show's only good point. The main maid lady is absolutely jacked, and I'm into that. What I'm not into is the fact that this entire show is built around a hardcore lolicon. Well, and I'm only saying that because I'm not sure how YouTube will react to me saying the words I actually want to call this absolute hunk of a woman. If you want any further evidence, I would like to point out the thing that made me not even get to episode 2. The maid character explicitly said, "I am uninterested in girls who have menstruated." You can't say that shit. Like, what the fuck? From what I can tell, there's two different camps around this show. One is the camp that I'm in, that this anime is absolutely abhorrent, and the other is the camp that this is satire around maid culture in Japan. First of all, I don't think this is the right way to make a satire like that. There are better ways to frame that sort of commentary. And second, you can't really get past the very uncomfortable aspects of this anime when literally every interaction between these two main characters has extremely disturbing undertones. And oh yeah, the little girl ends up accepting the adult who is constantly sexually assaulting her. This is what happens when you try to say something and fail only to say something that you should never say. The maid is such a waste of a sujidere. Next, gamers. Okay, we're past controversial anime and now into controversial anime opinions. I don't think that Gamers has a real plot. I was in constant pain watching this show as a writer because there are so many plot holes that I don't think that there should have been enough room on that paper to print any ink on it. I think that this show should be a thesis as for why anime and other stories should stop using misunderstandings as plot catalysts, because you can very plainly see just how little actual plot there is in this show. First of all, I got a checklist of 3 things I need to get out of an anime. 1, the story should be good. 2, if the story isn't good, then I want ecchi. And 3, if they can't provide ecchi, at least give me something cute. And I got none of those 3 conditions. Anyway, back to the story stuff that made me feel like I was watching my dog getting strangled. Everything would be completely fine if these characters just fucking talk to each other. Like, usually it's a thing that happens with every rom-com, but even with those, the situations are interesting enough where it is driven by something other than miscommunication. The miscommunication is only a modifier to an already established plot. But here, every single piece of what they call plot is just people not talking to people and communicating properly. This show is just a car that is being held together by duct tape and dreams, and the moment that even one part is actually fixed, the rest of it is just gonna fall apart because it's so messed up that it is only being held up by its own failure. These characters are insufferable, and it feels like some sort of divine punishment that I'm being forced to watch them all bumble around refusing to solve their own damn problems. I watched the entire show hoping that at some point someone would solve all the problems and would be introduced to some actual reckoning and character development, but there is no development. Gamers is a Sisyphusian hellscape for any writer to watch in horror as the writers of this anime continue to write around in circles for all of eternity, repeating the same worn out line of, I can't just ask this person what's going on, I must sit and pensively stare out the window. And finally, Citrus. I love Yuri. I do not love sexual assault. This show tests my relationship with these two concepts. This show is not a Yuri, it is a sequence of a girl being sexually assaulted by her stepsister and eventually having that stepsister blackmailed into prostitution. I honestly wouldn't even read a doujinshi with that premise. So I have met many people who also love Yuri, only to find that Citrus is their favorite. I don't know why Citrus is so popular, but it just is, and I do not appreciate that. Citrus was actually my first Yuri going into anime. I was interested in the concept of Yuri, but had yet to watch an actual Yuri anime. Citrus was being pushed by Crunchyroll at the time, so I watched it. I should have watched Bloom Into You like my friend suggested. I've been told since to read the manga, and I started it, but it's just so hard to get through the first 15 chapters, and I know it'll feel even worse as I go along. I don't find most of the characters likable. Mei is a block of balsa wood, Yuzu is the only one with any personality, and then there's Matsuri, who's a literal fucking criminal. I don't care if I'm spoiling this shit. That little fuck blackmailed a girl to sex work, and then no one batted an eye. Seriously, this girl sends Mei out into a dangerous situation with a strange man, and by the end of the arc, everyone's smiling and saying, can't wait to see you again. Like, what is going on here? And as more time goes on, the more I find to dislike. The overly sexualized nature of the show is heavily criticized by the LGBTQ community as it treats lesbians like sex objects for men to watch. The relationship between the two girls isn't just forced through assault, but it also feels just forced from the writer and they have no real reason to fall for each other. Also, I'm just getting real fucking tired of the step romance trope in general. Dome Kano had the best step scenario of all time, and I think that we should all stop now with the roll tide situations. This anime is the reason why I wanted to write my own fucking Yuri manga. Speaking of which, that's where the video ends, and I once again plug my light novel on Pixiv. I finished the first part. I'm gonna start working on the second part at some point. It's about two teammates on a girls soccer team learning to come to grips with each other's different personalities and approaches to the game. It also isn't exclusively Yuri, but there's, you know, a lot of it in there. It has a whole lot more interesting stuff going on, and I assure you the love does not blossom through any assault, I promise. Anime is good, but sometimes anime can be bad. I hope we've all learned something today about making good anime. Thank you. Like, subscribe, I still do have a Patreon, so yeah. This video is actually sponsored by Lucky Cat Sticker Company. Go buy some damn stickers. Slap them on your laptop, slap them on your car, slap them on your own face. I don't care. Go to luckycats.com and enter the code JOCK for 15% off. That is JOCK JOCK for 15% off at luckycats.com. Link in the description.